Hi, this is Karen Randall. I'm here from Colorado talking to you today about marijuana and the emergency department and what we're seeing here in Colorado. We legalized cannabis in approximately 2013. Today's talk will include basic information about cannabis, about concentration of cannabis and the new products that we're seeing available, and the reason why the concentration is such an issue. And we'll also be seeing and discussing medical issues related to cannabis as they present in the emergency department. Some of the very basic information that we need to know so we can understand why this is a problem here. Cannabis comes from cannabis sativa, whether it's hemp or CBD or THC. It all comes from the plant cannabis sativa. Sativa and indica are THC-bearing plants. Recently, the THC level has been increased, and as they increase the THC level on plants, the CBD level decreases. Ruderalis is traditionally known as hemp, and here in Colorado, state law says it must contain less than 0.3% THC, although it's important to note that this can be cross-pollinated by plants that are very far away. So if we take a look at understanding the changes, back in the 1990s and earlier, a typical joint contained about 1 to 3 milligrams of THC. And most of the time when people smoked a joint at that time or earlier, they shared the joint, so they were really getting less than 1 to 3 milligrams of THC. Currently, after legalization, we've changed how the product is presented and used. We now see that it's a smoked product, it's contained in edibles, it's contained in concentrates, and we'll talk about those in a second. And we also see products that are suppositories, injectables, tampons, transdermals, patches, creams, lotions, etc. This is what we call dab wax or shatter, and this is the most concerning part about the cannabis that we have currently in Colorado. Dab wax and shatter is made from a concentrate, and we take the plant itself. It's extracted with using butane or propane, and there's a liquid or a resin that comes out of the extraction process, and it's made either dab wax or shatter, and this is what you see on your screen here. If you look at the bottom left, it's called New York City Diesel. It's wax, and it is 62.3% THC. So if you have 100 grams, or if you have a gram, which is 1,000 milligrams, you have 623 milligrams of THC. It's called wax because the final product resembles earwax. Shatter, the final product resembles glass, and the same with dab. Dab is a little bit less, somewhere in between wax and shatter. Here's some of the available products that we have currently in Colorado. We have medicated lip balm, so you can see why this would be a problem with kids in school. If they take the patch off, you wouldn't know if this was chapstick or if it was THC chapstick. You have THC condoms, topical creams. We have down here in the bottom left, you have THC infused toothpaste. One of the potential real problems is tinctures of THC. So in this little bottle in the middle on the bottom, the high THC cannabis extract, 420 milligrams of THC in the bottle, but it's based on dropper doses, and people tend to way overuse this, which presents a problem. Next to that, we have the cannabis iced tea, we have cannabis tampons, we have desserts, candies, fruits, edibles, and we have THC infused toothpicks. Medical issues, I'll talk about a local community study. We'll talk about cannabinoid-induced hyperemesis, acute psychosis, vaping, and pulmonary injuries that we're seeing. And we'll also talk about what kind of impact we're seeing on youth and children, especially here in our community, knowing that we have 7.5 years of use here. This is my study. We record all the urine drug screens done in the emergency department since 2013. So we have approximately 8 or 9 months pre-legalization, because 2013 was the year it was passed, but it was not open for retail stores until 2014. If you look at the top line, you can see that this is recordings of all the urine drug screens done in our emergency department since that time. So we have, I think, about 40,000 tests, individual tests. And over the years, you'll see in 2013 on the top line, cannabis immediately started going up and has gone up continuously since legalization in 2013. That's the top purple line. The bottom or the middle blue line is opioids. And you can see where initially there was a mild drop in the use of opioids. However, since legalization in 2014, the use of opioids, or at least the positive tests in our emergency department, has gone up for the first 3 years, and then over the last 2 years it's gone down. But there's been a community effort to decrease the number of prescription opioids, and people here are transitioning from opioids to fentanyl, and fentanyl doesn't show up on our drug screens. The third line, and the most concerning line, is amphetamines, and we can see a marked increase, in fact, over a 250% increase in the use of amphetamines locally in our community. And the final line, the red line on the bottom, is cocaine. And our community, the use of cocaine has not really changed over this last several years. What this means for us is that legalization of cannabis in Colorado did not improve illicit drugs in the community. In fact, it seemed to give rise to a liberalization and usage of more drugs than ever in our communities. We're finding that, in particular, amphetamine has become very prevalent among our patients. And when we see them in the emergency department, the combination of amphetamine and THC use seems to be pretty predominant. This is the sound here, is the sound of hyperemesis. And I want you to listen to a couple more of this. So that's commonly what we call vomiting. This is hyperemesis, or scream vomiting. And this was a very small, less than 100-pound girl who was making that vomiting, and the recording was done outside the room. I can tell who's got cannabinoid-induced hyperemesis from across the room, and we see it with both THC and CBD. Some people believe that you can't see it with CBD, but it has been seen with CBD. It's most likely to develop in people who are chronic users of cannabis, and the symptoms, the primary symptom is loud vomiting, which you heard, and then repeated and persistent bouts of vomiting, which is cyclic. The cost of the hyperemesis is, for RED, a visit includes IV fluids, medications, CT scans, plain films, costs about $5,000 to $6,000 US. Our emergency department has seen at least one visit a day, and our hospital cost for over a year would be $1.8 million, and this is estimated on the low side. And now we know that there's 25 additional EDs in Colorado. A recent study by Zimmer et al. Shows that the average cost to diagnose cannabinoid-induced hyperemesis, or CHS, is about $76,000, and this includes CT scans, testing, and endoscopy, but does not include hospitalization. The recent article that I reviewed showed that there's an increasing number of pediatric cases that we've been seeing, and most predominantly, and interesting enough, it seems like the younger pediatric patients are female. We are also seeing acute psychosis, and the acute psychosis on the lines where I have never seen this significant before. We know that the impact of cannabis use and the development of psychotic disorders is very predominant. And a study done by Wilkinson et al. Showed that there are 3 distinct relationships. You have acute psychosis associated with acute intoxication, acute psychosis that goes beyond the period of acute intoxication, and you also have persistent psychosis, which is not time limited. So this means it can present at any point, whether you're using cannabis or not. And we know through this study that they can actually induce all the symptoms of schizophrenia or psychosis in a person who was normal by injecting them or giving them high dose cannabis. And at that time, 5 milligrams was thought to be high dose. Acute intoxication and psychosis in the emergency department, it's now being seen very frequently. My oldest patient was a 72-year-old female who was visiting from the East Coast. She ingested edible THC and presented acutely psychotic to the emergency department, requiring sedation and prolonged observation. The youngest one I saw was 2 weeks ago, was a 12-year-old who got, through social media, 500 milligram THC candy, and then she shared it with her friends. So each one of the little girls ingested 250 milligrams of THC. Mind you that the old joints contained 1 to 3 milligrams. So this meant that we had to do a prolonged observation in the emergency department and support vital signs while these children were here. The problem is the kids have figured out how to get this through social media such as Snapchat. If we move along to vaping injuries, it was a big issue just before COVID presented, and this is a significant lung damage. It's thought to be due to the inhalation of the propane, butane, or other products in THC. Most of the cases, according to the CDC, of vaping injuries were secondary to THC. This was over 80% of the cases. Some of the cases of lung injury or vaping injury were so severe that it required lung transplant. And on the top x-ray, you can see on the left is a chest x-ray that has some black in it. We like to see a lot of black. And on the right, you can see where there's almost white out. And that means that really none of the lungs are working. Several of these patients have required lung transplantation. So the cost of one transplanted lung patient is probably over $1 million, not to mention loss of potential financial abilities and able to self-support. So it's a long-term money loss and a significant cost to society. And these are associated with vaping, mostly dab, wax, and shatter. Cases are still occurring, although COVID has taken over media attention at this point. Some of the youth issues that we're seeing, recently there was a Colorado Healthy Kids survey, and it showed that children in our area are using more, and they're using at a younger age. Kids are starting their cannabis career with the higher potency products for many reasons. And several of the reasons are that there's less odor associated with it, so it's easier to use in a vape pen or a dab pen. You can basically take a hit discreetly every now and then from your pen at school. There are numerous ways to hide these. There is a vape hoodie that has a string that looks like a tie for a jacket, and it's actually a vape pen. Sadly, what we're seeing is that in our school district locally, in 2018, we have a 38% chronic absenteeism rate in kids going to the school. So if you can imagine over 1/3 of your kids chronically missing school, there has to be a reason. Looking at disciplinary actions. So what's happening to our youth in school? This is done from schools looking at 2016 to 2018. The blue is suspensions based on drug violations other than marijuana, and the orange is drug violations involving marijuana only. And you can see in 2016 and 2017, there are far more cases of issues involved with marijuana than all the other drugs combined. So the company and one of the the marijuana organizations have said that it'll be legalized. We'll make sure our kids don't get it. It'll decrease the illegal market. Our kids won't get it, and everything will be better. But what we've seen here in Colorado is our illegal market has taken off. Like I said, kids are getting it from Snapchat and other social media. And this is a report of the student marijuana source from 2017, and it was from the Association of School Resource Officers. And what they did was find out where these kids were getting their marijuana. 39% of them, so the bar on the far right, 39% got it from a friend who got it legally, and 26% got it from a black market. So you can see, and then an additional 23% got it from their parents, so also would be a person who would presumably obtained it legally. So you can see a good portion of our kids are getting it from people who got it legally or from the black market. So it has not stopped kids from being able to access cannabis and all the products associated with it. Before we leave, I think I would be remiss in not showing you some of the decorative scenes of our communities since legalization. I think we've seen it in all the cities here in Colorado, the big cities, and our city in particular, Denver as well as Portland and Seattle, where the number of homeless has just gone up tremendously. And I think this is accumulation of many factors. But one of the big factors playing into this is the prevalence of drugs. And it seems to me clinically working here, that the drug adventure starts with marijuana, and they are starting with high dose, high concentrate marijuana, and then expanding, looking for the better high or the bigger high. What we're seeing is a whole vast majority of homeless people. In the middle, you can see plants that were taken from an illegal grow, and this was in the middle of a very nice neighborhood. And the bottom picture on the right-hand side is a picture of my brother's neighbor. My brother lives north of Denver. He's actually a firefighter, and he was at work, and he got a message that his neighbor's house was on fire. It turns out that his neighbor's house was an illegal grow. And once you have it, if you have an illegal grow, you board up the windows in the basement. So basically, firefighters have to fight the fire from without and let the structure collapse, because if they go in, there's no egress through the basement windows because they're all boarded up. So that's my brother's neighbor, and he'd like to think he lives in an okay neighborhood. So these are all side effects of having legalization. We're promised a lot of taxes and a lot of tax revenue, but just looking at the costs, again, one emergency department in Colorado with 1 ER visit a day for cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome exceeds $1.8 million of cost. And so that cost is given to Medicaid or Medicare or insurance companies, which are paid for by the general public. The taxes go to, in Colorado, every state is different, the taxes go to discretionary funding, so they don't necessarily get turned back to the public. So we're really cost shifting all the societal costs of cannabis, but a few people are benefiting from the taxes, and it doesn't seem to be like the public at large, and specifically the single person who's paying more for taxes to support the medical as well as the police and community harms reduction. And at this time, I'd like to see if you have any questions. You can contact me or ask me right now, or you can always get a hold of me through Shane. Thank you. Bye.